أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قالوا أئنك لأنت يوسف قال أنا يوسف وهذا أخي قد من الله علينا إنه من يتقي ويصبر فإن الله لا يضيء أجر المحسنين. قالوا تالله لقد آثرك الله علينا وإن كنا لخاطئين قال لا تثريب عليكم اليوم يغفر الله لكم وهو أرحم الراحمين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. One of the most important lessons that we learn from the example of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their utter and absolute confidence and placing the entirety of their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that all goodness comes from God and all difficulties or trials and tribulations that are also meant to be an opportunity for us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the example of the prophets within the whole Quran is so unique. The idea that we can relate to them on so many various different levels. From the story of Adam and the trial of his children, to the difficulties that Nuh alayhi salam had to endure, to Ibrahim, to Musa, to Isa, to the life and legacy of our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, and undoubtedly in the story of Yaqub and Yusuf, peace and blessings be upon them, as well. And as we've mentioned now, sort of as a theme since the beginning of chapter 12 of the Quran, and we've almost concluded this very lengthy chapter, is that whenever any blessing came to Yusuf alayhi salam, he always reminds himself and at the same time reminds us that this blessing comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that every moment that there was a trial, and like we know Yusuf had to deal with a lot of them, he always placed his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even when he was speaking to himself, or when he was speaking to those in prison, or when he was speaking to the head of state, he always spoke to the importance of entrusting their affairs to Allah Azza wa Jal, and to remain patient in the midst of this difficulty. And this extends as well when we reach the pinnacle of Yusuf's success. Some verses ago, meaning some weeks back, we talked about the moment when Yusuf alayhi salam had received every single blessing and every single bounty. And that monetarily, physically, tangibly, from this dunya's perspective, when he had been appointed as virtually the head of state, when he had the treasures of all of Egypt and its kingdom under his authority. That for him was khaza'inul ardh, that everything under the earth was under the fingertip of Yusuf alayhi salam. And again, that's a moment of incredible victory for him, from this boy who was stuck in a well on the verge of death, gasping for air, gasping for help, gasping for some sort of support, beaten, bloodied, bruised, literally. No savior for him other than for him to die in that well. Yet he finds victory at that moment when that caravan comes. And then Yusuf alayhi salam is courted by this woman, meaning the entirety of the government is against him. And she and all of her supporters are literally conspiring against this young man. To that moment when he was in prison, and again abandoned and forgotten by even his closest confidants in that prison. Yet he always remain patient. And at that moment, seemingly from our lens, from our perspective, when he has been released from prison and he has all of the financial means that anyone could ever dream of under his fingertip, we think, oh, Yusuf alayhi salam, he has attained victory today. For his patience, he gets this. For his taqwa, his God consciousness, he receives this. But over here, in verse number 90, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that there's another layer to success for Yusuf alayhi salam. Not only the physical, not the fact that he's been given this, position as the king of Egypt, or the right-hand man, however you want to understand it, or responsible for all of the finances of this region, which was this massive kingdom during that day. It's when he had once again been reunited with his family, and the fact that he had the opportunity to teach them a little bit about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are in that gathering after they've returned back this final time, begging Yusuf alayhi salam to return their brother Binyamin back to him so they can return him back to his father. Again, they don't know that this is Yusuf. They don't know that this is their brother. They don't know that this is the one who they've abandoned. To which Yusuf alayhi salam is sitting on his throne, and he looks at these brothers of his. Again, he knows who they are. They don't know who he is. And he looks at them and he says, قَالَ هَلْ عَلِمْتُمْ مَا فَعَلْتُمْ بِيُوسُفْ وَأَخِيهِ إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. He looks at them and he says, do you know what you have done to Yusuf and his brother? Meaning, do you know what you've done to me and my brother? In that moment, they realize, wait a minute, that this one who is speaking to me, like, how could he know about what we did to Yusuf? Nobody knows about what we did to Yusuf. To which they respond, قَالُوا أَإِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف. Are you Yusuf? قَالَ أَنَا يُوسُف وَهَذَا أَخِي. To which he says, yes, I'm your brother. And this is my brother, Binyamin. قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَيْنَا. And listen to what he says. He says, surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us this favor. I didn't get this on my own. He doesn't say that because of everything that I did, I received this. Sometimes when we get a blessing, monetarily, whatever it might be, we get this job, we get a big paycheck, we get some bonus, we get a whatever, immediately we think that it's due to our own merit. Very well, it might be from your own merit. But at the end of the day, that merit, that potential that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with, it comes from Him. And at the very least, we need to acknowledge that fact that it comes from Him, and to show gratitude, and to show thanks. And once we realize that, that's like what it means to being a believer, because it's hard. I'll give you an example. One of the hardest things for anyone to do, we talked about this some weeks back in our last discussion, is to give our own wealth in charity. Right? We have obligatory charity in our tradition. Khums and zakat and zakat al-fitra, and we have a whole host of charities that are obligatory, and of course many that are recommended. The first thought that's going to come to someone's mind is like, why should I give up my money? I worked so hard for that. You know how many years I had to study so I can get that paycheck? You know how much blood and sweat and tears I had to put into that? And now I'm supposed to just give it to some random people who I don't know on the opposite side of the world? Why don't they work for it? Or it's not my responsibility, someone else can do that. At the end of the day, once we recognize and we submit to the fact that none of that which I own is mine anyway, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why is it difficult for me to give something back to exactly where it belongs? If someone came to me and gave me $100 and said, I'm traveling, I want you to hold this $100. When they come back from their trip and they say, hey, give me my $100 back, like, how silly would it sound for me to tell them that, like, no, I'm not giving this back to you, because you know how difficult it was for me to hold this for you? At the end of the day, you kept it as a trust, and it's an obligation to give back that trust. This trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that this money is not yours in the first place. You can keep, for instance, 80% of it. Just the 20% in the khums, you have to pay it. No, 20%, what the hell? I'm not paying that. Even if it was 5%, the same person would respond the same exact way. If it was 1%, we would respond the same way. Where does that come from? It comes from this pride and this arrogance and this negligence of who our Creator is, and the fact that this bounty and this blessing comes from Him. قَالُوا أَإِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف. Are you our brother, Yusuf? قَالَ أَنَا يُوسُف وَهَذَا أَخِي. Yes, I am Yusuf and this is my brother. قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَيْنَا. That surely this is a blessing and a grace that has come from our Lord. إِنَّهُ. And then he tells his brothers, and for us as a lesson, he tells his brothers, what is the solution? Or sorry, what is the opportunity? What is the means by which I can be a recipient of this? Meaning, how can you also receive this blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That surely, if someone has taqwa, has God consciousness, and they're patient, those two qualities, the two recipes for success, taqwa and sabr, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not waste the deeds of anyone who does good. If we keep God consciousness in our mind, number one, and number two, we remain patient, these are the recipes for success. And God makes a commitment and a promise and a guarantee, as stated by Yusuf, Salamullah alayh, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, that God will never waste, will never forget the good deed that you do. People will forget good deeds. People will always forget the nice things you do for them. That's the reality of the world that we live in. For lack of a better word, for a better phrase, people suck sometimes, right? Excuse my language. That's just the truth. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's aware, He knows, and if you do it for God's sake, you'll benefit in this world and in the next. And if you do it for people's sake, you got to get ready for disappointment. Because people stay disappointing us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stays having our back and supporting us and putting us in positions and places to be successful, and will undoubtedly reward us for everything that we do, as long as what we do is for Him. Azza wa Jalla. So He tells them that surely if you are God conscious, you have taqwa, and you're patient, then know that God won't waste any of your good deeds. Remember, we said some weeks ago that whenever, at every opportunity, it's amazing, if you were to read this chapter multiple times, you'd always catch it, that every single time that Yusuf had an opportunity to teach anyone about God, he would do so, right? Even at that moment. Imagine, this is like a family reunion that's 30 plus years postponed, And he could have done anything to them at that moment. He could have reprimanded them. He could have held them to account. He could have scolded them. He could have done whatever he wanted to. Instead, he tells them, the reason why we have received this blessing, why I'm here, is not because of anything other than the fact that God has been very kind to me. قَالُوا تَاللَّهِ لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ اللَّهَ عَلَيْنَا وَإِنَّا كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ. And then they admit, these brothers, they're seeing their brother now, who's the king, who's the head of state. They're humbling themselves in front of him, realizing that everything that they did to him, how much regret they must have, had in their heart. When you've done something, when you've wronged somebody, how embarrassed you are to look at their face. When we're children and we do something, poor to our parents. When you treat somebody, in a way that you should not have treated them. You spoke to them in a way that you shouldn't have spoken to them. Your spouse, your family, your friend, your child, children to their parents, whatever it might be. How embarrassed you feel, and you know that the worst and the most difficult thing to do is say, I'm sorry. It's hard. It's really, really difficult. So they look toward him. Imagine how much embarrassment they feel. They thought that they had killed him. Really, they thought that he had died. He was a kid. Sometimes even if we think back on the way we choose to treat people when we were children, it makes us feel our stomach, makes our stomachs hurt, the way that we spoke to others, the way that we acted with, now let alone now you actually have to see their face after all those years. And then they remind you of what you did to them. How difficult is that? Think about it from their side, right? Of course they were wrong. Of course they were sinners. Of course they made this awful mistake. So they look at Yusuf alayhi salam and they said, you're absolutely right. Allah has given you this incredible blessing that He didn't give to us. Why? Because we're sinners. We did the wrong thing. To which Yusuf alayhi salam shows us beauty, and he shows us humility in the most perfect way. I can't express to you how incredible the response of Yusuf alayhi salam is. He states, قَالَ لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمْ الْيَوْمِ. He says, don't worry about it. Forgot. 30 years, what you did to me, tried to kill me, your younger brother cheated me in this way. لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمْ الْيَوْمِ. There's going to be no vengeance taken. Take a deep breath. I'm the king, but it's all good. يَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لَكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He'll forgive you. You don't need to beg me for forgiveness. You don't need to say you're sorry to me. يَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لَكُمْ وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. For surely that God of ours is the all-merciful and the all-compassionate. How much mercy is dispersed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They didn't just treat their brother like that. They treated a prophet of God like that. A son of a prophet of God. They themselves were as well. Meaning that their responsibilities is even greater. Right? Your father is a prophet. Your brother is a prophet. As we also learn from our ahadith, Binyamin was also a prophet, meaning their other brother was a prophet. You're in the house of prophethood. They're the sons of Yaqub. They're Al Imran. They come from a family that's been chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're born and raised in that environment of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we grow up in a house, in a community where there's belief and there's conviction, naturally our judgment, our accountability is going to be much higher than someone who wasn't exposed to it. Naturally, we believe in a just God, no? I was born into a family that prayed. I was born into a family that loved the Prophet ﷺ and the Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them. I was born into a family that fasted during the month of Ramadan. My threshold for being held to account when I'm negligent of that is far greater than someone else who wasn't. Am I right? I studied, the Islamic sciences for 10 plus years. I have obligation that's greater than your obligation. That's why I'm sitting on this side and you're sitting on that side. I don't mean that in any arrogance. I mean that in a sense of humility. Let alone these children of the Prophet of Allah. Over here, he states, يَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لَكُمْ. That don't worry about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you. وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. That even for them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will demonstrate His mercy and His compassion to them. So don't ever think, I say this all the time, my friends, don't ever think that the door of that mercy and that compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ever closed. It's always open. The opportunity is always there. Out of the kindness, out of the gentleness, out of the grace of our Creator. In verse number 93, اذهبوا بقميص هذا فألقوه على وجه أبي يأتي بصيرا وأتوني بأهلكم أجمعين. Yusuf alayhi salam then gives his shirt to his brothers. And he says, go and take this back to my father. And place this on the face of my father, and he will regain his sight. And we mentioned some weeks back that due to the intensity of the grief of Yaqub alayhi salam, that he was at the verge of blindness. He was weeping so much that he was unable to see clearly anymore. And then he said, and bring back the whole family here. Bring them here. What do we learn from this? Just one moment. I think we left at this verse last time. Number one, that there's a sense of sacredness to anything that is linked to the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam had this miraculous power and had this ability to intercede on behalf of the eyesight of another prophet, just because of the effort and the devotion and the God conscious of Yusuf alayhi salam, that his shirt was also linked with blessing. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. That sometimes when we go, for instance, to visit the Prophet of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you go to the Holy Kaaba, you go to visit the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, when we talk about the fact that being in their presence is a healing power, at the very least healing of our hearts, of our souls, a place where we can have our du'as answered, or our or forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the evidence is right here, where the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam was a cleansing, purifying, source of healing for, again, another prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It demonstrates again the nature of the sense of sacredness. He says, take this back and return my family back to me. وَلَمَّا فَسَلَتَ الْعِيرُ قَالَ أَبُوهُمْ إِنِّي لَأَجِدُ رِيحَ يُوسُفَ لَوْلَا لولا أن تفندوا. So it is said that that caravan, the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, with the shirt of Yusuf, begin to return back to Canaan. Canaan is, of course, where Yaqub and his brothers had lived, and of course where Yusuf alayhi salam had grown up. And at this moment, Yaqub alayhi salam, he says, as the caravan is still some distance away, he states, "Inni la'ajidu riha Yusuf," that surely I smell the fragrance of Yusuf. To which all of this tribe's people, the people in the community, they begin to come to him, and they tell him, like, dude, like, what are you talking about, man? Like, you've gone crazy. قالوا تالله إنك لفي ضلالك القديم. They tell him that, oh Yaqub, like, you're so much in love with Yusuf that you don't want to forget about him. Of course, they don't know that he's still alive and that he's in the state. They say that you're such in your mind of something that happened decades ago, you don't want to forget about it. But I swear, my friends, this is like what love really is. Yaqub alayhi salam, he knew that there might be a potential for him to be reunited with his son, and every opportunity that he gets to remember him, he did just that. And at the same time, again, Yaqub alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's also being tried by this distance from his son. فَلَمَّا أَنْ جَاءَ الْبَشِيرُ أَلْقَاهُ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ فَارْتَدَّ بَصِيرًا. All of a sudden, someone had come with good news. Maybe someone from that caravan rushed up ahead and said, "Oh Yaqub, we have good news for you. Let me tell you about Yusuf." And at the same time, he takes that shirt. Can you imagine? You haven't seen someone in a long time, and you get reunited with them after decades. At that moment, the shirt was placed on the face of Yusuf, on the face of Yaqub alayhi salam, and his vision was regained. قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون. Immediately, what does Yaqub do? He looks toward all of those who are laughing at him or mocking at him. He says, "Didn't I tell you, brother, I know something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that which you don't know." Remember, at the end of the day, these guys are still prophets, and their ultimate objective is to teach these people about Allah. And when they saw their prophet in that way, they had probably doubt that how could our prophet be acting like this? How could he be dreaming about something that happened decades ago? He immediately reminds them, "Inni a'lamu min Allah," that surely I have this knowledge that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ma la ta'lamun, and you don't have that. So you remember where knowledge comes from. You remember where authority comes from. You follow what I'm saying? In verse number 97, and this is really important. قال يا أبانا استغفر لنا ذنوبنا إنا كنا خاطئين. Yusuf alayhi salam is back in Egypt waiting for his family. Yaqub is now reunited with his sons, who come to take their father back to Yusuf. But before they do that, they have one order of business. They go to their father and they say, "Ya Abana," "Oh our father, istaghfir lana dhunubana," that ask God for forgiveness for us. Now they have this regret. They feel bad. They know what they did was wrong. Inna kunna khati, that surely we admit that we were the wrongdoers. Number one, like we said before, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to go and ask for forgiveness. And as we saw every time we went back to the story, or back to Yaqub, back to Canaan, every time, Yaqub always told his sons, like, you guys have done this to yourself. Sawwalat lakum anfusakum. He says, your souls have done this to you. You know what you did to my son. You know what you did to me. Knowing very well that they did something to him. And they would always sort of dismiss it. Now again, I want you to go back to that scene of that moment when you saw that person who you wronged, and they threw it back in your face. How difficult it was for you. Or the embarrassment that you felt, just remembering how you did something that you should not have done to somebody else is hard. But at the very least, what we learned from these sons of Yaqub is that they were persistent. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. and to go to their father, in that state of emotion, who is just looking for that glance at his son after all of these decades, and tell him, Istaghfir lana dhunubana. But just please ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness for us. Inna kunna khati'een. Yaqub also could have said anything to them. In the same way that Yusuf could have held his brothers accountable, Yaqub could have been like, no, dude, your problem. It's not my fault. You guys put yourself in this situation. No. He's the Prophet of Allah. Let alone, again, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. قال سوف أستغفر لكم ربي إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. He responds in a way that's very similar to Yaqub. He says, Inshallah, I will make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and inshallah you will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-forgiving and the all-merciful. Why didn't the sons of Yaqub ask for forgiveness directly? Why did they need to go to their father? Anyone have any thoughts? Yeah.
Because their father is somewhat like an intercessor for them.
Yeah. You could go and ask God for forgiveness yourself, and clearly and likely, seemingly, they must have done the same thing. But they still felt this emptiness in their heart. They still felt this regret. Over here, they ask not only their father for forgiveness, but if you go to the verse, they state, Istaghfir lana dhunubana inna kunna khati'een. In the next verse, Yaqub, he responds, Astaghfiru lakum rabbi, that I will seek forgiveness from my Lord for you. So exactly like you said, that they realize that their father is, number one, their father. Number two, he's a prophet as well. Number three, they also wronged him, but he said, I'm going to ask forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when we commit a sin, to ask, our parents, for instance, to say, like, you go and ask Allah to forgive me, nothing wrong in that. In the same way that when I go and I stand in front of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or in front of one of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and say, oh Allah, I'm asking you in this sacred place to forgive my sins. We're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but utilizing the intermediary, the intercessor, like you said, as a means to have our sins forgiven. إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. And Yaqub, he says, yes, you will find, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the all-forgiving, the all-merciful. Good? So now what happens? After all of this, Yaqub alayhi salam, he has his sight regained, and he joins the company of his sons. They begin to make this voyage back to Egypt so they can be reunited. فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَى يُوسُفَ آوَى إِلَيْهِ أَبَوَيْهِ وَقَالَ ادْخُلُوا مِصْرَ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ آمِنِينَ. That they made this journey, and as we stated before, that whenever the sons of Yaqub would make that journey from Canaan to Egypt, it was difficult. They had to pack all these things. They didn't know whether they're going to come back with, their provisions. They wouldn't know they'd come back with their brother that last trip, right? This time it was easy because they knew where they were going. They were going home. They were going to their brother. They were going to be reunited. They're going to be reunited with their father. We're going to reunite their father with their brother. فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَى يُوسُفَ. That at that moment, they entered into Yusuf. They entered into the presence of Yusuf. Now Yusuf is king. Yusuf is head of state. Yusuf has, again, the blessings of all of the worlds, of all of this dunya under his fingertips. فَلَمَّا دَخَلَ عَلَى يُوسُفَ آوَى إِلَيْهِ أَبَوَيْهِ. They embraced Yusuf alayhi salam, his mother and his father Yaqub, and his mother. وَقَالَ ادْخُلُوا مِصْرَ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ آمِنِينَ. To which his son, he tells his parents that, it's all good now, enter into Egypt safely, enter into my home. وَرَفَأَ أَبَوَيْهِ عَلَى الْأَرْشِ وَخَرُّوا لَهُ سُجَّدًا. This is important. And then he seated his parents high upon the throne. He's the king. He's the head of state. He places his parents and he makes them in a very lofty station. And at that moment, they fell down in prostration toward him. Why do they prostrate? Someone says. Don't we only prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's a couple of different opinions. One is, of course, that prostration is only due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we prostrate and we make sujood, we're making sujood to Allah. So when the parents of Yusuf, Yaqub, and his spouse, they prostrate, they're prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to Yusuf salamullah alayhi, maybe in the direction of, but performing, for instance, sajda shukr. They're thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and my prostration that is not in salat, it doesn't matter in which direction it goes. Whether I face the qibla or not, according to many of our ulama, is valid anyway, for instance. For instance, qibla is this way. If I prostrate this way, even though I'm prostrating in the direction of all of you, at the end of the day, my prostration is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a symbolism of thanks. The second one is no, that this prostration, for instance, is a prostration of love or of adoration or out of respect. And it's not a prostration, for instance, of worship of a deity in any way. Meaning they weren't, of course, worshipping Yusuf alayhi salam. For instance, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands all of the angels and all of the inhabitants of paradise to prostrate toward Adam, it wasn't that they were prostrating to Adam because they were worshipping Adam. It was a prostrating toward Adam out of a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a sign of reverence for Adam alayhi salam, being that he was their prophet. He's the prophet of the angels and the jinn, for instance. قال يا أبتي هذا تأويل رؤياي من قبل قد جعلها ربي حقا. And at that moment when they fall in prostration, he says to his father Yaqub, he says, "Oh my father," he said, "Do you remember when I was a kid? Remember after all these years, finally seeing his father. He said, remember when I was a kid and I had that dream?" He said, "This was what I was dreaming about." What was the dream? We talked about it in the very beginning, all the way in the beginning of our conversations on Surah Yusuf alayhi salam. He states, إِذْ قَالَ يُوسُفْ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِي إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ أَحَدَ عَشَرَ كَوْكَبًا وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ رَأَيْتُهُمْ لِي سَاجِدِينَ. He states that surely I saw 11 stars and the sun and the moon prostrating toward me. And then at this moment in verse number 100, this is verse number 4, in verse number 100, when his parents prostrate toward him and his brothers do as well, he says that this is the reality of my dream, my brothers and the sun and the moon, meaning my parents, at this moment in a state of prostration. And then he says, Yusuf alayhi salam to his father, he says that this is the dream that I had. قَدْ جَعَلَهَا رَبِّي حَقًّا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly has perfected this. وَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ بِي إِذْ أَخْرَجَنِي مِنَ السِّجْنِ وَجَاءَ بِكُمْ مِنَ الْبَدْوِ مِنْ بَعْدِ أَنْ نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. He states that surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been really kind to me. From that moment that He brought me brought me out of prison, and He brought you to me, and He has removed the shaitan from between me and my brothers. These are His symbols of victory. He didn't say that moment, for instance, when I received all of this money, when I got all this power, or now I sit on this throne. He says, my blessings are these. Number one, I was in prison all alone, and Allah saved me. Number two, I was distant from you, and we've been reunited. And number three, my relationship with my brothers have been repaired. Inna Rabbi latifun lima yasha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very kind. He states, surely my Lord is very attentive. The word latif has been often translated into a lot of different things. Amongst them is kind, amongst them is very graceful. But latif in the Arabic language literally means precise. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is so detail-oriented, particularly in the way that He blesses us and in the way that He gives us opportunities to be successful. So He tells his father and everyone in the court at this moment, Inna Rabbi latifun lima yasha. That surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with such precision, He has given us this. He has reunited us with this blessing. Innahu huwa al-alimul hakim. Surely He is the all-knowledgeable and the all-wise. I'll stop over here for today. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala al-tayyibin al-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.